Hello and welcome to Last Week On, the podcast where we take our favorite TV shows, movies, books, video games, everything at this point, and we go back through them. My name is Adam Straughan, and I am joined yet again on my journey through The Last of Us with the one and only Mr. Joey Dean. How are you doing, Joey?
I'm doing great. I wore my pink plush today for the cold weather that we're experiencing. We had a little snow last night, as I'm sure you did as well in New York, but you're a little more south than me. Yeah. And I am gonna be seeing one of my closest friends today for her birthday. So, and good day.
That's incredible. Where are you traveling for her birthday?
Connecticut. So like an hour and a half in the direction of Connecticut. Don't know if that's north, east, west, south.
Right. You're just going.
Geography question mark. Yeah, we're just going. Right?
Yeah, you'll just teleport there. Yes. Are you driving?
Yeah. Oh, it's not that bad. We had snow overnight, and it kind of just dusted. It looks like a pretty scenic winter painting outside.
Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, it'll be fine.
I always love that about like Americans in general when they talk about like driving places. They're like, oh yeah, it's just like a 3-hour drive, you know, and like. Us like Brits are like, what? Like 3 hours? Yeah. Like, where are you going? But like, because America's so big, you just get used to driving long distance. You know, like, people are going on road trips for like 8-hour journeys. Like, yeah, we just drove there. And I'm like, what? It's wild.
It's crazy. Like being a musician and touring, and like the idea that like the longest drive I had was in, I think it was like, I don't know. I want to say it was definitely was no longer than 3 days of like time between shows, but we had a 36-hour drive.
Oh my God. I couldn't even imagine.
Crazy. It was just like a one-off across, like we were in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Minneapolis. I never know how to say that. Again, geography question mark. But we were in Minnesota and we had to drive to Los Angeles. So, and it was an opportunity to perform at Whiskey A Go Go, which is one of like the most iconic venues on the Strip, and we had never performed there before, so we took the opportunity and then almost crashed on the way. But yeah, Americans and driving, not the same as Europe. Not the same as Europe.
Hell no. Jesus. Well, speaking of Americans and going on long journeys, that brings us to this episode, like a cheeky little segue there.
Good job.
I know, right?
It's like you've hosted podcasts before.
This isn't your first time. So we are looking at episode 6 of The Last of Us, titled Kin. Now, I mean, that episode, like title itself, it's slapping you in the face with things that we've been talking about all the time. You know, so basically in this episode for me, there's two kind of major themes that run through this. One of them, obviously, kin, which is the family that you have and the family that you make. You know, so that's kind of a big theme in this episode, which obviously we'll dive into that. And we've had themes of that all the way through the relationships between like Joel and Ellie, and then how Joel views his family. And the other theme I've got is trust. You know, like putting trust in people and how that can then play out, whether that's a good thing, where you choose to place your trust. That's a big theme in this as well. So before we jump in, Joey, like what's kind of your overall thoughts on kind of the themes and like the feel of this episode?
My first theme that I wrote down was same as what you said. Who is family? Also the idea of what is family and what are the expectations of family. One thing I've talked about a bunch, which I think came out a lot in this, is the exploration of good versus bad. Yeah. And if our actions align with our nature, or if our actions are reflective of our nature, or if they are maybe disconnected in the apocalypse. I also saw a lot of focus on this friction of past and future, particularly an idyllic future that is inspired by the past, and certain characters creating space for that idyllic future and other characters not necessarily believing it's possible. Obviously, there's this exploration of Joel's capabilities and aging and how that plays in with good, bad, familial trust. And then I also wrote sheep ? So wherever that leads us, sheep ?
I love that. Let's just leave it there. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, like, the episode opens where we get a flashback of the horrendous ending of the last episode, where, you know, and this kind of leans into this more of the PTSD and that kind of, you know, the panic attacks that we start to see Joel's having. And, you know, this is obviously Henry is just killed his brother and then ends up shooting himself. And it's that horrendous reminder of like what we've gone through in the last episode. And then we get that, you know, 3 months later. And things are different now. You know, we've seen the passage of time. There's like snow everywhere. It's like, it's very it kind of looks beautiful where they are. It's like we're very removed from city life now. We're like out in like the open back. Like we start off on this ranch. Yeah. And like, we're following this farmer or like hunter. He's bringing obviously game back to the home. And I really like that this straight away sets up that theme of when, later on we get like, we see a ranch, like this ranch that's built on love. We kind of saw that before with Bill and Frank when they had their own kind of little ranch, so to speak, in their little town. But this also builds onto Joel's dream, which he talks about later on about he wants to own a ranch with sheep and everything like that. And this kind of life that they're looking at here is almost like the life that Joel alludes to wanting to have, being removed from society, just being like there in solidarity in this like nice little ranch that he has. But yes, I mean, this ranch, we see a couple. I kind of love this couple. I think that it's obviously a husband and wife. I think that she's an icon. Just the way that she talks and like how relaxed her demeanor is, as if like no shit's given. Like, I'm not in trouble. I'm fine. She laughs about things. Like, I love, like, she says, like, they're wrong. He didn't hurt me. And like the husband says, you made him soup. And she's like, well, it's cold outside. Like, even though they're held under there at gunpoint, she's just so friendly with Joel and Ellie being there. I just kind of loved this opening for that.
I was low-key obsessed with this woman. I loved her. I loved everything about her.
Yes.
I love characters like that who have this really still satirical presence. It's like everything is a joke. But like they're also like they're kind of standoffish. Like they're one arm's length away, but like they're also caring. Like she made them soup. I just love women like that. I think they're so entertaining, and I think us queers really like bond with women like that. I thought that their dynamic, husband and wife, was just so cute and so funny, and it was such a nice break and buffer from the opening of the episode, which was the conclusion of the previous episode. So it allowed us to decompress a little bit from the trauma and kind of segue into what became a more, I don't want to say lighthearted episode, but a more expositional episode that was a little calmer and less edge of your seat. The stakes weren't as high, at least not until the end. So it was a nice way to introduce with this couple.
Yeah, absolutely. I love like that relationship's built on the fact that they've removed themselves from so much fear. Like again, they allude to stuff later on when they talk about, don't go past the river, there's death there. But like, all the other relationships we've seen up to this point, it's people just trying to get by and survive. It's been so tense. We saw Henry and Sam last episode. Like Bill and Frank seemed really idyllic until they got attacked and like things changed there. And like, whereas this couple have they've removed that fear from their lives and they can joke and just have fun and laugh about it. And I really like that we saw a different view of this world from this couple who were just fun, like just a lot of fun. And, like straight away when like, obviously Joel's asking about Tommy, they're like, we don't know any Tommy, and like asking about fireflies, and like, they have no idea who the fireflies are. They're like, there's people who are fireflies, just like, just this line.
So funny.
I know, I loved it so much. But again, it just shows how innocent they are away from, it emphasizes as well the journey that Joel and Ellie have been on up until this point and the shit they've been through. And yet this couple have no idea about half of that because they've removed themselves from this society, just living their own little life in this wilderness. And I love that.
There were just some nice like echoed relationship dynamics. So, I mean, I guess the like isolation in general and the idea of being alone, I think was parallel to Ellie and Joel, but also how they spoke. And the husband said that he wanted to go there to disconnect. And then the wife said that she said, I didn't want to, which reminded me of the dynamic of Bill and Frank in episode 3. And it seems like they didn't need to include that, but I think that they really wanted to create a web that connected all the characters and forced or encouraged the viewer to scope into each relationship as an echo of another relationship, because everything in this is like a pair of two: Joel and Tess, Bill and Frank, Henry and Sam, Joel and Ellie, Joel and Sarah. As we meet in this episode, Tommy and Maria. Everything is in pairs of two. Going back to episode 1, where their house is house 11, which are like two lines standing next to each other, which emulate the end of the credits, which are presumably Joel and Ellie standing next to each other. So there's this, and then the idea of mirroring and parallels. It's just, there's a lot of this imagery of like two and two lines and two things that are communicative or correlative of each other. And so this was just a passive couple funny moment, but still the writers chose to incorporate some connective tissue to other relationship dynamics. And I thought that was really smart.
Yeah. And again, like what's nice that links into that is like we get a taste of Joel wanting to be the singular. You know, like once Ellie's dropped off, he wants to live by himself in solidarity on this ranch with sheep, question mark. But, you know, and
Yes.
then but then as this episode goes on, the idea of that is no longer appealing to him. And then it's back to the two again. You know, so it's interesting that he toys with that idea of the singular, but then it goes back to the two. And that's, you know, we build up to a lot of that in the sense of that, you know, communication and relationship kind of building between Joel and Ellie in this. And it is the two, as you said. It's a really nice point there. I like as well, we get the moment here when he says, look, you know, point out on the map where we are. And like, you know, your wife's already told us, make sure you point to the same place. We get an echo of that as well in a later episode when Joel does exactly the same thing with somebody else. So it's quite nice at the introduction of that.
Yep.
And then, you know, they kind of, you know, decide where they're going to go. Obviously, they get the warning, like, you know, he says, where's the best way west? And he says, oh, go east, aka don't go that way. They get the warning about the river, there's death beyond the river and everything like this. When they go outside, and then this is the first kind of instance of when we see like this panic attack from Joel. And like all the memes on the internet have been going wild with this. And I kind of love it where people are like, oh my God, like the thought of seeing this or doing this. And it's just the images of Joel holding onto that pole, like breathing heavily. Like people see snow outside for the first time this year. And it's just like Joel holding on that pole, which I kind of love. But yeah, now this obviously is everything kind of catching up to Joel right now. Like the trauma that he's been through, the losing of people, you know, like everybody close to him, literally Tess, Sarah, you know, he doesn't know where Tommy is. Maybe he's been told that Tommy might not have even made it, you know, and he's like, everything's catching up with him. And at the same time, it's this worry of like, you know, I'm getting older, you know, like I'm looking after this little girl. And we obviously see, this is the introduction, but we get the reflection of that with the conversation he has with Tommy later on when he really kind of breaks down over that. But yeah, what was your thoughts on like the panic attacks that were induced here, Joey?
Yeah, I had like a mixed perception of it because even though like I totally understand the character exploration and the vulnerability, I don't think this is necessarily something explored in Joel's character in the game as much. No. This like level of vulnerability. And so it was strange to me to perceive Joel in a different light in which he is experiencing some character weakness. But I do think that this is allowing us to develop a deeper relationship with understanding the stakes of their dynamic, Joel and Ellie, and the weight that Joel is putting onto this relationship, the weight that Ellie is putting into this relationship. I also, it kind of just hit me all at once, the sheep imagery, and Jesus is a shepherd. Jesus sacrifices himself as a savior. And I think that this goes back to this conversation of being a hero and showing up as a savior. And Ellie is presumably that vantage point into the story because she wants to offer whatever she can to the cure, which relates maybe more to that sheep imagery than we've explored so far in the show. But also Joel, who is demeaning the idea of being a hero, he kind of like brushes off Tommy wanting to be a hero. He kind of talks to Ellie like the Firefly's mission is just, you know, silly. But he himself wants to show up as a hero, and that's where this anxiety and this panic is coming from because he can't. He wants to be a hero to Ellie. He wants to be that father figure. He wants to be the one to save her constantly. And we're being reminded constantly throughout the show, down to in this episode when he wakes up and he grabs his lower back, when he's out of breath with Sam and Henry, when they're running to go underground, when he's walking up the stairs and he's getting winded. I mean, there's this constant echo of Joel's getting older. He's not as physically capable anymore. And he can't therefore show up as much of a hero as he wants to. So even though he's demeaning it, he wants to be that role.
Right. And that savior complex does creep up with him right to the very end. You know, so like the final decision in the video game, at least, obviously we'll see the finale tomorrow of the show. But, you know, that final decision that Joel decides to make is a decision for himself over the decision of the better of everybody else. It's almost like the anti-version of what Christ did, you know, like that kind of, you know, repenting for the sins of humanity. He takes that burden on himself. And yet Joel kind of flips the script a little bit at the end there, where he does something for himself, because that's the best thing. He needs to save this person at the behest of like everybody else, and the kind of, what that could mean and everything that stops there, and then leading into the second game, how that plays out as well. It's a really nice exploration, actually. And obviously the imagery is definitely there, as you said, which is a really nice point, actually, with, being a shepherd, the sheep, living in solidarity, like all of that kind of leads up to that really, really nicely. So then they go to, cross the river of death, as Ellie puts it. I love this kind of the scenery here of like, we get beautiful montage shots, like, just the openness, like the scale of like this world, how big it is and how beautiful it can look. This is just beautiful earth that we're seeing right now. We're away from buildings, we're away from cities. We're just seeing this beautiful snow, this white canvas. And then they set up in a cave. And then Ellie again is still asking, she still wants to learn all the time. And that's a big thing in this episode. She's still asking things of him about the old world all the time. So we get conversations later on. She's asking about what university's like. And like she's reading a diary later on about, what people are interested in the old world. And again, this is the start when she's asking, will you train me how to catch rabbits? She still wants to learn. Obviously, there's the talk there of like, doing the dressing and everything like that. And she's like, oh my God, we have to do that, but I'll learn. And I really love that she's always keen to do that. Nighttime comes, they're in the cave. I love that we see Joel taping up his boot in the way that we saw Tess doing that in episode 2 as well. Ellie's on guard, she comes down, she tries she's like, can I try the whiskey? It's just curiosity from her all the time. We get this where Ellie is this dreamer character. She's always interested in learning new things. Like later on, she talks about reading about astronauts and like Sally Ride and like, this theme of, again, this leans into that, the theme of like space and wanting to explore space, her fascination with that. We get the big moment in the second game as well. It's nice we get these imagery of that, but she is a dreamer and she's a believer. She wants to be the thing that will help people, whereas Joel's kind of more cynical about things. And I love that we get this reference back to this all the time. And she even asks like, if the Fireflies, get my blood and make the cure and create it, then what do we do? And Joel says, we? And I love that. Her belief and kind of her relationship is really in Joel. She's putting her trust in Joel. He matters a lot to her now. She believes in the best of Joel, even when he doesn't.
She is definitely a dreamer character. Explored in The Last of Us 2, Ellie is also an artist. And I think there are parallels here with maybe Frank's character earlier on in the exploration of art and how art plays a role in character development or like the exploration of soul. But we haven't seen that much with Ellie yet, but that does come up in The Last of Us 2. And that dreaming really comes forward in this love of outer space and how she talks about how she is constantly looking up. The only place that she has is to look up. And I also thought this was communicative of her personality and her role in the dynamic of her and Joel, where she's constantly looking forward. She's constantly trying to move forward. And Joel is oftentimes looking in the past, which is that friction I brought up earlier on of like the idyllic future and what the future can be and what the past is or was, and being stuck in an idea of the future or an idea of the past. And then they have this conversation. What would you do if the cure works? Where would you go? What would you do? And he says, an old farmhouse with some land and a ranch. I thought this was a really sweet foreshadow to the home that we experienced to the latter half of the Last of Us 2 game. I just thought there was so many nice, this show does such a really great way to just plant Easter eggs. Every single dialogue choice or imagery choice is so intentional, down to her sipping the liquor and saying, yep, still gross, which alludes us to the next episode in her backstory, Left Behind, when she is drinking on top of the building. And I just think this show does a really great job of all that. I mean, watching it through again, I'm just like they just hit every single foreshadowing note. It's so nice. So I just thought this was a really great exploration also into Ellie's relationship with space. I thought that was a really also foreshadowed moment.
Yeah, I mean, this show does what you're alluding to there. Like, it works so well with the source material, and I think some of the best things do that. Where, of course, like it doesn't take liberties, but it takes what is there and just makes exploration more of what was there. So like stuff that was there that was suggested, Bill and Frank, we got a whole episode about that. And again, this, you read ridiculous comments online of people saying, oh, they've done this, they've strayed away from the game. Well, they haven't. They're honoring the game in the best way because they're working so well with the source material and just bringing more elevation to what's already there. And that's incredible. And that's why the show stands so highly in both of our favors, because it just works so well with it. It's just doing such a great job and giving us those moments that as gamers, we see and we recognize and we go, wow, like I know the point they're making there. I know the reference that they're making there. And I am here for it because I get it. And even for people that haven't played the game, when they kind of go into the second season as well, they've set up so much beautifully in this first season that there'll be moments that pay off so nicely going into that. And I'm excited for that. I'm really excited for that. But yeah, so I like the little scene as well when like Joel falls asleep. Then Ellie decides obviously to take watch. And then like he suddenly wakes up and he's like, oh my God, like, he's looking around for her and she comes down holding like the gun. And he says straight away, like, you can't do things like this. And I love that Ellie comes back and says, look, I was quiet. I checked my 6. I looked for tracks on high ground. And like, I'm a natural. It's just like you taught me. And I think he's starting to recognize now, again, like we had this reference where Joel was the one who put the gun in her hand. He started to trust her. He understood that she kind of, was starting to learn. Was starting to understand how dangerous this world can be. Also how to identify that danger, but also how to protect herself. And he's starting to realize more in her through this episode. He sees things like this, like, she's just listed everything that he taught her. And it is that kind of moment of, right, okay, actually, you can do this. Like, you are learning more from this. And you are less cargo to me now and more like a person. And I think that definitely rings true by the end of this episode.
And also Ellie becoming what she believes Joel is. And the deep dive with Maria's conversation into, is Joel a good person or a bad person? And Ellie donning this behavior that is, I don't want to say animalistic, but is just so unfiltered that she has a particular perception of Joel. She admires him. She enjoys power. This is the fascination she has with guns, down to smelling them. She wants to feel powerful. Yeah. And Joel is powerful to her. And not only is he that familial father energy, that trust that you brought up, but also he's, in her eyes, a badass. And she wants to embody what she believes that he is. So we see this here in which she's like, this is what you taught me, down to like she's paying attention to every single thing Joel does, both the good things for survival and the bad things, which could become immoral or, question mark bad things. Bad and good are loose terms in the apocalypse. Another foreshadowing moment, she says, you should teach me how to hunt, which comes back in episode 8. So they just smack you in the face left and right with all of these little seeds. And I love it.
Yep. Always a payoff in this show. And that's what I love. What I will highlight in these next there's 2 moments in this episode of when things were now magically digitally edited out. So when this episode first aired, there was 2 mistakes. And this kind of alludes to one of them, where they then set off on their journey. They're going to cross the bridge, and there's this big wide shot, and like down by, I don't know if you saw this, Joey, but down by the bushes, it was shown that there was like part of the filming crew that was in the shot.
I did not pick it up when I was watching, but I saw pictures online.
Right. And like now they've edited it out, which fair enough. But these things can happen. I mean, God, like you look at something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, when you put that into widescreen, you can see crew standing right there next to the actors. It's one of those things, but it's been corrected. There is another little moment I'll point out later on as well, but it happens. Now, I love this as well. Like, you said they have the conversation about like hunting, which again, as you said, beautifully played off as well into like the later episode as well. And then, they come to the big dam. I love that this is a reference back to, just Ellie saying, damn. Like Joel's just like, that's stupid, but I love it. It's like that building on like the puns kind of book again, like how stupid this is, but let's still have a laugh while we're on this journey. Like, let's make lighthearted this, because we are getting on now. That relationship is building. We have a relationship now where we can make these stupid puns and laugh about it. And this is from the game, right? When he kind of says, how does that work? And he's like, oh, creates like hydroelectric. Don't ask me how. You know, it's a game reference, but also alludes back to Joel isn't the smartest person ever. When he tried to explain how to siphon fuel from the car, and she kind of called him out on the bullshit, and she was like, "You don't know." And before she could even get to that, he's like, "Don't ask me how, because I don't know. I just know that much." I just love that little moment. But yeah, and then what happens next, Joey?
Well, they identify that maybe the River of Death wasn't the River of Death.
Yeah.
They see a bluer river, and Ellie pays attention to it, thinks, stops, and says, "What if this is the River of Death?" And then she turns, and they are being surrounded by men on horses and Maria, who
Hmm.
is probably the one in charge.
Yeah.
And they have a dog, and the dog sniffs out if someone is infected. And Joel is forced to drop his gun. He's in this state of fear and panic as the dog
Mm.
sniffs him and then moves to sniff Ellie, which we know she is detectable because she did come up positive on the scan in episode 1. So we're put in this space of fear and anxiety whether or not Ellie is going to be detected. And she's not, which is great. I
Hmm.
love the joyous, childish break and how she embraces the dog, and it's cute and everything. But the focal point here for me is Joel's expression
Yeah.
and how we're seeing into the psychology of Joel. We're seeing that tension of fear and survival. He wants to
Mm.
do something he can't, which comes back later in his conversation with Tommy. But as Maria is one of these people on horses, she, as we learn, is Tommy's wife, and she recognizes similarity in Joel's face. She kind of gives him a squinty look.
Mm.
And I think that was intentionally placed because when we meet the couple in the beginning of the episode, they say, "Does your brother look like you?" And he says, "Kind of." And
Mm.
so it plants the seed that Maria is kind of thinking, like, "Oh, he kind of looks like Tommy." And then he says, "I'm looking for my brother." So she immediately goes forward and takes them to the town, which was so perfectly designed. It looked
Mm. Yeah.
identical to the game. And I loved
Mm.
it. I loved that moment.
Yeah. Same. Like, I love, like, as soon as those doors open and they kind of ride into Jackson, just, oh, like, that is society how it would look if it's rebuilding itself. You know, like, this is the view of, like, this is Ellie almost kind of getting to see, if my blood creates a cure, is this how society can rebuild? We can come back together.
Mhm.
There'll be settlements like this. We are building back, like, as I said, mankind, really, and building back the world that we used to know. Obviously, Ellie's never known that world, but it's a taste of how it could be in reference back to the past of how it used to be. And I just really love that. I love that moment of, like, it takes its time to linger in there while we look around, because we've, like, up until this point, we've seen, like, look at Kansas City. You know, like, it pales in comparison to this, where it was just like a dictatorship. Everyone's driven by Kathleen wanting to get revenge on Henry. There's nothing else here. There's no sense of family. There's no sense of, like, community in terms of, like, bonding and relationships. It's just very, very militant. You know, like, we're looking for people coming in. We're armed. We've got guns. You don't see any of that here. Of course, like, you know, they're held up at gunpoint to start with, but once they go into Jackson, it's freedom. It's all of the fears of the world are removed. You know, they allude to, you know, we're so far out here, that conversation later on when, you know, we leave bodies further out. It's like a warning, but not everything that, you know, is a warning of bad there means that it's bad, because we have this world that we're just protecting. We're protecting our little world. And I love this. I love that so much. And as you said, it's perfectly captured from the video game. It looks incredible. But that moment when Joel sees Tommy and shouts at him, this for me was like, oh, like Pedro Pascal's face, like when he sees Tommy, and like when he gives him that hug, it's finally, we see some relief for Joel for like a split second. You know, it's just that moment of, oh, I can drop all of this. And that finally, we know how much family means to Joel. And this pays off that when he sees Tommy and embraces him like that. It's just beautifully played. And I felt emotional watching it just because of, we know how much this means to that character. And it's that final relief that he gets to be with a member of his family who he trusts, who he knows, who he loves. It was perfectly done.
Pedro Pascal is such an exquisite
Oh,
actor.
oh,
He takes us on such a journey. His acting chops are really displayed throughout the roller coaster that is The Last of Us. Obviously, everybody's acting is amazing. And another moment here that I thought was really telling and really moving was Bella Ramsey's face.
Mm.
How Ellie is essentially experiencing loss, realizing that Joel isn't her kin,
Mm-hmm.
that Joel has kin that is separate from her,
Mm-hmm.
that the relationship that she has perceived is, in her eyes, idyllic. It's not this reality. She is convincing herself, more or less, that this is a sustainable relationship, that this is a familial figure. And to some extent, it is at this point. But we see inside Ellie's soul and her insecurities and her personal losses. And that is also a topic of conversation later on in this episode, that she too has lost a lot. And we haven't seen that yet up until this point, unless we played the DLC, the extent of her loss. But it's nice that she is seeing into the genuine, authentic familial connection that he has with Tommy. And there's definitely jealousy present.
Oh, 100%. And that comes forward in the conversation that they have later on, obviously in the bedroom, just them two, which is lifted very much exactly from the video game. One of the most key moments of the video game. But then, yeah, obviously then they head inside. They go into the canteen. They're obviously scanning food, like, scanning down this food because it's been a while since they've eaten properly. I love like Ellie's demeanor here in the sense that, she's hardened now by the fact that, she grew so close with Henry and Sam. They were gone immediately. And it's like by the end of the last episode, just the way she was like, which way is it? Let's go. It's like the way that she builds relationships with people, she's on guard with herself now. The only person really that she feels like she has that with is Joel. He's the only constant in her life. And she alludes to that later on. Whereas, people that she's had relationships with, like in the next episode, when we see that relationship goes with Henry and Sam, that relationship goes, she's become so hardened by this now. So the way that she's spitting out like swear words left, right, and center. Joel even says, mind your manners. And that doesn't stop her at all because she's just like, can I have my gun back? Where's my stuff? Like the sense of trust, she's still not there. And that's really interesting for that character, that now she's become very guarded. And I really, really like that. We get a flash of this potentially Dina character, which I really liked as well. This girl who looks at her. And I really hope, it is that little Easter egg. It's a little nod to the games as well, because we know how much that relationship builds in the next game. And hopefully we'll see that next season as well. I like this moment's really important when Joel says, look, can we have a moment here with just family? And then Tommy actually says, well, actually, Maria is family. Ellie straight away is like, oh shit, congrats. And Joel doesn't say anything. Ellie then has to remind Joel, your manners. And he's like, yeah, congrats. Now, this is, the look on Pedro Pascal's face again. This is Joel. This is kind of like the life that he wants. Like he had a daughter, he was a father. And like comparison, he looks at Tommy. Tommy's in this settlement. He's living a pretty good life. He's got this like wife now who's pregnant with their child. And Joel's probably retrospectively thinking back, thinking, what the hell life have I got now? What have I had where my mission has been to find Tommy, to save Tommy, to come and save him, to save my brother. Look back at episode 1 when he had to like bail Tommy out of prison, right? And then like now he's got this brother who is living this life, setting up this life, compared to Joel, who's been through horrendous shit, lost pretty much nearly everybody in his life except his brother. He's transporting this girl on this horrific mission who isn't even his daughter. And when he finds Tommy, Tommy's good. Like Tommy's good. And that's kind of like, that's the life that Joel wants. And it is just that moment of that recognition in him when he's like, Jesus Christ, like he's got this life, like this future now. He's got this child on the way. What have I got?
I think a lot of this boils down to the roles that we as humans accept in life based on perception and how two things can exist at once. And I think this is why the pun book is so consistent. This might feel contrived or like an overanalysis, but hey, what's the podcast for if not for overanalyzing?
Let's go.
A pun is in and of itself something that means two things. And there is this friction of good and bad and what that means for each character. And we obviously at this point have really explored that Joel is both a good and a bad person and sits somewhere in the middle. He has access to doing bad things, but his nature isn't necessarily bad. His actions come from care. His actions come from protection and wanting to be an anchor for his family, who, as we're witnessing that dynamic within Ellie and him, even though Ellie's not his kin, if you will, but will become essentially, or is growing. We also see Jackson as this outer reputation. It's scary. They kill people. They drop bodies. Even the way on the outside, it just huge wall. It just looks scary. And you go in and there's just so much humanity and there's so much care and there's Christmas trees and there's real people. And I just think there's this friction of what is something versus how is it perceived. And I think that Joel is walking into seeing Tommy. He has lived his entire life. The moment this outbreak happened, Joel was in protection mode. He was making quick choices. He was being actionable. He saved them. And yeah, they did bad things, quote unquote, but Tommy's alive because of it. And now Joel is being deemed this bad character by so many people when Joel's intentions have always been rooted in a frequency of love and care for those around him, to make sure that everyone around him is safe. And so he kind of accepts this role when he and Tommy have a conversation later in the bar, like the first conversation they have. And he's lying about how Tess is and lying about Ellie. Tommy says, "Oh, you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart." And Joel says, "There's a price, there's a payment." Joel is doing this out of the goodness of his heart. And Tommy, his own brother, can't see that. Tommy, his own brother, has developed a perception of his kin that isn't aligned with the true nature of Joel, that we're able to explore because we're seeing within the perspective of Joel. But the people that have surrounded him historically do not see Joel that way. Maybe Tess did, but we don't know that to some extent. And who Maria believes Joel to be is based on what Tommy has told her. And so we have Maria, right after the nice Dina Easter egg, which I love, we have Maria justifying their behavior and saying a bad reputation doesn't mean you're bad, and looks at Joel. She kind of believes Joel's bad. So it's an interesting friction. It's an interesting exploration. Anywho, continue.
Yeah. But no, like, man, that's a really interesting point. And what's nice is that we as the viewer, get to see this character develop as Joel. Whereas the last time Tommy saw Joel, it was in that kind of guise of he's a bad person that does bad things. It would be unbelievable for Tommy to ever think that Joel's doing something out of the goodness of his heart. Because the last time he saw Joel, he saw the type of person that he is. We have been allowed the pleasure of going on this journey with Joel and seeing how he develops and how he is changing. But also Ellie's done that. So she sees Joel differently from the way that Tommy sees Joel. And even though their relationship, obviously they're brothers, they've lived a lot longer together, and have had a lot more time together and have known each other really, really well in the past. It's Ellie's perception of Joel that we as the viewer share because we've seen the development of Joel over this time. And he is a different person now from when we first saw him in episode 1, when he was that cold, stoic version that Tommy now did know, but will soon realize is different. And yeah, it was really, really nice. I really, really like that. So then obviously they go outside. Maria gives them the grand tour of Jackson. So they're walking around, they're talking about the protections that they've got. They keep quiet. They're out in the middle of nowhere. They've got like a school. They've like sort out their laundry, like how they do their power. Like it just sounds incredible. Like the way that they've set up this settlement and everything's working really, really well. I like as well the little moment of like it's collective ownership. And then Joel says also it's communism. And like Tommy's like, no, it's not like that. Just the way his face, like he takes a second to think and he's like, actually, I just love that little moment. That was really fun. I need to ask you, so Ellie, obviously they then go and see the horse in the stable. The horse is called Shimmer. Is that the name of Ellie's horse in the second game?
It is, yeah.
I thought so, yes. I love that.
It's totally her horse to be.
Right, I love that, yeah. Another moment here as well is that it would just been now digitally edited out, but you could see one of the crew members' hands holding onto the horse's reins as Ellie approached it, and then that dropped. So like,
I
and
didn't notice.
it was there to hold like the horse's head up basically, so Ellie could stroke it. So yeah, love that little reference point as well. You know, as you said, Ellie's horse to be. Beautiful, beautiful foreshadowing. And then obviously Maria asks for Joel and Ellie to be like housed over from them. And then, as you said, this then leads into the Tommy and Joel bar scene. So they go in, and again, you know, he's lying to him. He says, "How's Tesh? You know, she's fine. She's all right." And then, yeah, what happens in the rest of this conversation, Joey?
Tommy is interrogating, if you will, trying to get behind the what's going on. Why are you here? To save me, sure. And they're kind of having this brotherly bonding moment, but
Yeah.
it like the bond isn't fully there, which is interesting because again, exploration in this episode of like what is family, and we're seeing a closer bond with Joel and Ellie, who are not family, than we are with Joel and his brother Tommy. We do know that things ended a little rough. Joel spoke about this earlier on, that Tommy left upset with him or not happy with him. But ultimately, after lying and not being honest, Joel learns that Tommy is pregnant, if you will, although Maria is pregnant, but that's how straight people speak. So Tommy is pregnant and he's having a child, and we see this jealousy bubble up. And I think that Joel, to go back to what I was saying before, that he's kind of always showed up as the protector and always showed up as someone seeking to make sure Tommy is okay, and like Tommy's okay without him. And that Tommy left, hasn't said anything, and now he started this new life. He has a wife, he's going to have a child, and obviously there's so much jealousy because this is the life Joel wants. But I think that there's so much more than jealousy. I think there's abandonment.
Yeah.
There's that post-traumatic loss. He's reminded that he doesn't have a child. And similar to him not saying congrats before, he says, when Tommy says that he hopes he could be a good dad, Joel says, "Guess we'll find out."
Yeah.
Which is this completely shut off response. Joel doesn't want to give Tommy any credit. And I think Joel also looks at Tommy like an older brother would a younger brother. I mean, he thinks Tommy's the silly person who wants to go off into the army and be a hero. And I think there's a part of Joel that hasn't fully accepted Tommy as his own person, that Tommy is simply maybe an extension of Joel. And this is also explored in episode 1 when they're eating breakfast in the morning. And he says again that Joel says that Tommy doesn't love him. He just relies on him. He's dependent on him. And then Sarah says, well, I think they're kind of the same thing, but which is explored so much here. But we have this perception explored where Joel sees Tommy as someone who depends on him, and Joel needs people to depend on him. That gives him value, that gives him purpose. So the fact that he's walked into this situation and Tommy doesn't need him and he's fine, he's happier, Joel's pissed off. He's upset, he's broken, and they end this conversation arguing, and Tommy says that you can't be mad at me because you're stuck in the past, essentially.
Yeah. And I think it's beautiful. Like a lot of, just to piggyback on what you were saying there in terms of perceptions, it is like we've talked about Tommy's perception of Joel at this point, and asking that question, like, you're doing this out of the goodness of your heart, because I know the type of person you are. Yet we know, and Ellie has this relationship now, and us as the viewer, with Joel, and like how much he's developed as a character. But then Joel's having his perception of Tommy challenged in this moment as well. As you said, like he knew Tommy as this character always getting in trouble, getting in fights, like, and Joel shows his love through protecting people. That's how Joel shows his love. Like protecting Ellie, like he was the one to protect Tommy. He was the one to help Tess as well, and like protect her when he could. And that's always kind of, like protecting Sarah up until a point. And that's always kind of ended up biting him on the arse, so to speak. But yeah, Tommy's always been the constant in that. So it's an interesting kind of conversation of perceptions here for each other, and how they are kind of shocked at each other, how they've changed as people. And as you said, we get that line, he says, just because life stopped for you doesn't mean it has to stop for me. And we go back to that moment, Joel's watch stopped the moment that Sarah died, stuck in the past, and that's such an interesting kind of metaphor to go all the way through this. Just because people, as we used to know them, were these type of people, Tessa's line, were not good people, we've seen Joel do great things. We've seen Joel help. We've seen Joel look after Ellie, teach her things, father her. Just because we have these perceptions of people doesn't mean that they are stuck like that or should be stuck like that. And these are like the opportunities when people are moving on and developing. And if there's anything that this world can do, it is to make you develop, to make you grow, to make you stronger. And like we see that with the Ellie character, we see that with all the characters in some way, shape, or form. But that line was so integral, and especially when Joel goes outside, talking about that time stopped for you. You're still stuck in your trauma. You're still stuck, from the loss of Sarah. Your watch literally stopped at that point. He goes outside and sees a Christmas tree. We get this sees somebody who he thinks is Sarah from behind. And it's this panic attack again, oh my God, everything's changing. Like the people who I'm supposed to be protecting, it's all different. I've got this massive weight on my shoulders, and it's just, how am I going to protect these people? How am I going to protect Ellie now when I'm literally falling apart? And again, it was just beautifully played, this scene. It was really well done.
I really like the Christmas tree. Well, first of all, I want to say that I think that the anxiety attack, the panic attack that he explores here, obviously is rooted in or connected to this imagery that he's having with Sarah. But I think it's also stemming from Joel accepting that he's failing to protect people, and Tommy being so good without him and so happy, thriving. Joel is realizing that he's made everyone's life worse.
Yeah.
And this is bringing him back to Sarah. And that's, I think, why he imagines Sarah in that moment, because then his trauma is triggered, and he's brought back to that space of, every time I fail a person, I just remember I failed my daughter. And I think that is just such a driving force. It's his nucleus. It's what keeps him going or not going. It's what drives his actions, his thoughts, his behaviors. I love the Christmas tree as well, because a Christmas tree represents tradition. And there is this idyllic future versus past idea. But Christmas trees also bring in the idea of Christianity, which bring in the idea of the sheep, which bring in the idea of a savior. And I love that, maybe just hinted, but it is there, it's present. And there's a flashback later on of Joel and Sarah putting ornaments on a tree.
Yeah.
And this moment of trauma, this moment of, I can't protect people. Joel wants to be the savior. He wants to protect people, and he can't be. And I think that's when, at the end of the episode, he's like, you know what? I don't really want to be the shepherd, if you will. Because maybe he's accepting he can't be as much as he wants to be.
Yeah. And as well, Christmas time, it's all about bringing family together. And yet, Joel's sense of family of so distanced from each other right now. They're worlds apart. And even though Tommy's standing right there with him, they're still different people right now. It's that recognizing the family in that person. It takes a lot for Joel. And even later on when he has that conversation with Tommy, and he breaks down in front of him. And it's that realization of God, this kind of family unit, this desire and this wanting to protect you, wanting to come and find you to make sure you're okay. This has been my driving force now. Everything's just so different from what I thought it was going to be. And it just really hacks at him at that point, which, I mean, when we get to it, but it's beautifully played by Pedro Pascal. I love this little scene when Ellie is obviously showering, and then she comes out, she's showered, she's got clothing, which Maria's put out for her, and the menstrual cup. And then reading the leaflet about it, she's like, oh. And this is just, I love Craig Mason spoke about this when he said the idea of this came from, when he was shopping during the pandemic, and he had to go out and buy tampons for his wife. And straight away was that thought of God, these little things, what if we couldn't get hold of this? And we had reference to this earlier on, in one of the earlier episodes when Ellie is the one that finds the tampons, because Joel would never think about doing anything like that. And it's just that nice little, that's that reusable cup. It just makes things easier in this world. No more tampons that she has to think about. And I just love that. It was just that reference of thinking of how things like this, you and I spoke about, Joey, in one of the episodes where, what if you lost your glasses? What would you do? And it's just thinking about this and the details within this world. If am I giving you anxiety? But what would you do if things like this that are so important to us, that we use every day, that we almost kind of take for granted, it's there, if they were taken from us, oh my God, what would we do? How would we kind of navigate through this? It was a nice little moment to reference that.
Yeah, and there's this pulled focus on Ellie as an adolescent who's growing into womanhood.
Yeah.
And she's in this bedroom that is truly a young girl's space. Ellie isn't connected to this. We learn Ellie is a lesbian,
Mm-hmm.
and this focus of like the top 10 hottest guys, and a note from the secret admirer hanging on the wall, and this focal point of like menstruation and womanhood, and how this coming of age experience for Ellie has a lot of this identity crux, this identity shift, this idea of how do I fit into this world? And she is seeing so much opportunity for herself through the actions of Joel, because she's like, oh, yeah, that's how I see myself. And when I
Mm-hmm.
grow up, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
And I think that because she's so disconnected from the space that she's in, and she's so disconnected behaviorally from what is expected of young people, when they're at the table earlier on and Ellie's just cursing and she's shut off, and Joel's like, mind your manners. We're learning Ellie is not fitting any expectation. She's a rebellious person. She is
Yeah.
rebellion. She is anti. And
Mm-hmm.
she is constantly going to show up as an adverse to expectation down to her sexuality. And I think that there's just this little enough of a focus of her coming of age to have us question, like, even though she's great with Joel, like, is Joel actually the right person to be around when you're in this vital space of development, that like his behaviors are influencing you? Like, are they good behaviors? Are they bad behaviors? I don't know.
Right. But she obviously learns a lot of importance from Joel as well. And that's just in the terms of survival, like how to navigate this world as a dreamer, who wants the best of
Mhm.
things. How do you navigate this harsh world, which will remind you of the reality versus the dream, right? And that's what we get. That's the learning that she gets from Joel. But she also gets a really important learning point here from Maria. And this takes us obviously into 2 episodes into the future as well. But she goes into the room with Maria, like sits down. She like says, "Look, I'll give you a haircut." Sits down. She notices the names on the chalkboard. It says Kevin and Sarah with dates next to them. And straight away, like I like as well before that, she's talking about Maria says, "I used to be a district attorney," kind of again referencing back to the before, what used to happen before, which is Ellie's hotspot. She kind of loves that stuff, learning about what people used to do, how things used to be. And then she says, "Oh, sorry about your kids." And she says, "Oh, kid, Kevin, Sarah was Joel's daughter." And that's the first time that Ellie gets a notice of, oh, he's never told me about this. And like it is almost like a kind of a sense of there is more to Joel that I don't know. Because right now, Joel, like Ellie probably thinks she knows Joel the best. And that sense of when she saw Joel and Tommy hug, this is a person who's Joel's known for years. This is his family. And yet Ellie's been on him and probably knows him better than anyone, but she didn't know that. And that's kind of like, I'll keep that stored because I didn't realize that. And probably a lot of things are starting to drop in place in her mind at that point of how Joel's been with her. Like his demeanor with her, this kind of like, the conversation of you just cargo to me, am I not family to you? All of this is starting to drop into place. And I love that. But also really importantly here is that Maria says, I noticed that you're not telling me everything. You're not telling me the whole truth. And she says, that's good. Be careful who you put your trust in. The only people who can betray us are the ones we trust. And that's such an important line. And I think it even, one, it rings true on Ellie's face when she kind of really listens and takes that point in. But that is so true. They've had their trust betrayed so many times already. And like reference back to when they first arrived in Kansas, when they saw the man walk out into the street, Ellie's first reaction was, should we help him? He looks injured. Joel straight away, no, seatbelt on, let's go. Do not trust this situation. 2 episodes into the future, when it's a very Ellie-centric episode, when she bumps into the people in the forest, there's no trust there immediately. Straight away, they seem friendly, they seem nice people, but, we'll obviously talk about this more when we get to that episode, but Ellie straight away, put your weapons down, take 3 steps back, stay where you are. Whereas the older Ellie prior to that, with how nice in their demeanor was, probably even maybe would have gone along with them. But it's so important for her character development here. And especially what we get from this point going right to the end and into the second game. This is the carving moments of the Ellie that you and I know, Joey, and what we'll see going into the future.
Yeah, you just nailed it. As you wrote everything that I wanted to note about that scene. I also just love the wisdom of the only people who can betray us are the ones we trust, because we can't be betrayed by people we don't trust, because that's not betrayal. How are we betrayed? So I think it was a really nice, simple way to contextualize it, and obviously is, aside from really summing up actions that have been thus far and this trust dynamic, It's going to really take us into the conclusion of this part of the story. You know, whether
Mm.
or not we see that in the climax and the finale, I don't know really how
Right.
they're going to set that up. I don't know if there's going to be a little bit extra after this. But the conclusion of the first game boils down to that idea. And this was explored earlier on. You and I spoke about this in some earlier episodes, but the fact that it was so plainly said, I thought was really important. I also, there's a lot of setup for The Last of Us 2, in which Maria has a lot of tension and
Hmm.
contention with Ellie's personality,
Right.
Ellie's behaviors and actions. I think that there's a respect there that she thinks Ellie is a smart little cookie, and and she she respects her and she understands that she's a byproduct of her life experiences, and how there's a part of Ellie that reminds her of Joel, and there's a part of Joel that reminds her of Tommy, and probably the part of
Mm.
Tommy that she doesn't like, the part of Tommy that scares Maria because she wants to have this perfect idyllic future. And there's a part of Tommy that Tommy can pretend all he wants that he's a hero. He's also been a villain
Hmm.
and he
Yeah.
owns up to it. But Maria seems to not own up to it. She blames Joel.
Yeah.
But no, that's your man's did that as well.
He was
And
there.
we see this major conflict between those two characters in the second game,
Hmm.
and it's very rooted in Ellie's role in that relationship as well. So I think this is also a space of foreshadowing.
Mm, absolutely. Sorry, Maria says to Ellie, go to the movies, right? We've got like a film playing. She's sitting there with all the other kids. And it is that kind of moment of when you sit there and sometimes you can be alone in a crowd. And like Ellie's kind of sitting there, kind of, and this feels weird to her, you know, being surrounded by people, probably similar age to her. Everyone's kind of living just a normal life watching this TV. This isn't a life that Ellie's like lived really at this point, although she has been kind of fed her school and things like that, but not like this. Like Federal, like school, obviously Federal living, as we've seen, the QZs are very different to what we're seeing in Jackson. You know, and like just sitting there watching the movie, but the whole time her eyes is kind of like watching Tommy. You know, that's her main thing. She can't let her guard down here. And again, this sense of trust. I can't let my guard down here. I've got to keep an eye on what's actually happening. She's watching Tommy, she's watching Maria, she's thinking about Joel the whole time, even though this movie's playing. And then this next scene, this kind of, you know, the reference of Joel fixing his shoes has kind of sat with me for a couple of days. And it's only kind of really now us talking about when it's really sank in what that metaphor means. You know, especially the fact that with Tess, you know, like he was focused on fixing her shoes. Shoes is what we wear to take a journey. We go a journey in our shoes. And like as time goes on, our shoes break down. And like Joel is like that journey, he's trying to hold it together, right? And like trying to fix the shoes. It's that metaphor of that, trying to keep himself together rather than starting anew. And then here we have Tommy, who started a brand new life, brings Joel in a brand new pair of shoes. It's almost like that reset. You know, like Tommy's now wearing this new pair of shoes. His old journey, who he used to be, is put behind. And almost kind of like, you know, Joel's hanging on to that. Like Joel's hanging on to that relationship he had with Tommy and like, you know, how things, those relationships that he had with people that are now gone. It is that taping of that shoe, holding on to that. Whereas Tommy is presenting the new to him and brings him a new pair of shoes and apologizes. And that's just kind of sank with me there now, that metaphor of doing that, which we see again and again through the show.
Yeah, and I also think that I don't know if this is like just a bizarre out of the box reference, but my voice coach recently introduced me to this song and wanted me to sing it for him. But there's a song from the show Kinky Boots, and it's called Soul of a Man. And
Mm.
it's a pun on the soles of a shoe,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also talking about the soul of a person. And it is the soul of the shoe that's falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And it obviously is something physically that we put all of our human weight on. But I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if, to expand on what you were just saying, this is a manifestation of Joel's inner self. It's
Yeah.
a reflection of his soul, and how he is so deeply trying to hold himself together
Mm.
and hold on to the past. But Tommy is walking in and introducing a brand new way of life and saying,
Mm-hmm.
you can have something brand new that
Yeah.
works. And Joel and his stubbornness and his pursuit of being the savior, of being the hero, he is egotistically holding on to these old ways that
Hmm.
kept him alive and not accepting that there is a new way that we can restart. He doesn't believe. He thinks that there is a bit of, I don't know. I think there's a part of him that thinks this town is silly and is
Hmm.
dreaming, and like it's only a matter of time before people come and try to break in the fence, like he told
Yeah.
Bill.
Hmm.
And I just think that he is in such a disconnect, and that's a really great point and a great metaphor. And I didn't think of that until you just brought it up.
Yeah, it's a lot of what you've said there beautifully, Joey, about like the soul, like the soul of like Joel is an old soul to a degree. And I like that, that metaphor of talking about the soul being like, two-ended with the soul of a shoe, the soul of a person, who you are. But it's also, the old expression, to get to know a man, you have to walk 100 miles in his shoes. And the perceptions here of Joel and Tommy of each other are now brand new. And it's like a brand new pair of shoes because we now have a brand new perception of one another. And I just love that metaphor. And I think that's really interesting, fascinatingly done. But again, this conversation, like he brings in the new pair of shoes, brings in the stilettos. He then says, I apologize, like they're kind of rekindling the
Imagine
kind of,
they were stilettos. I'd
can you
fucking
imagine?
live.
I
I
would
would
die.
live. Knee highs. Let's do it.
Like stomping his way through like the rest of this season. Give me that, please. um, then, they apologize. And then straight away, it's kind of like back to business. Joel's like confirming, look, the university that we need to go to, like where the Fireflies are now, like that's the point. He's like, look, the Fireflies might have a camp in this university. He's like, this isn't a suicide mission. Will you confirm that? And then he then reveals this is the moment where we've spoken about trust. Joel still feels that trust that he has for Tommy. Like he's my brother, he's my kin. I can trust him. And he says straight away, like, Ellie's immune. And like straight away, like Tommy's reaction is, oh, what do you mean? Because this is brand new. This has never been a thing before. And he says, like, everything. Tess, Marlene, Ellie saved his life. Like Henry killed Sam. He then goes on this big tangent from the beginning, just tells Tommy everything. And then he admits to exactly what you said before, which is about feeling weak. Like I feel weak. He fears he's too old to look after people anymore. He talks to him about the panic attacks that he's having. And like, yeah, he even says, like, in my sleep, I'm failing people, I'm losing something. And like, oh my God, this emotional breakdown from Joel, from Pedro Pascal, is just, as you always say, Joey, exquisite. Like his acting here, he allows to show those acting chops. And it's just beautifully done where we see Joel at probably his most vulnerable up until we've seen him now. We see that crack of that character. And it is almost like that, the new pair of shoes. This is a new opportunity. This is a new point for us to get to know where each other are, who we are now as people. And that breakdown is just played so beautifully by Pedro Pascal.
Oh, this was amazing. It was beautiful. It was so nice. Alluded in the beginning as you explored with just seeing Tommy for the first
Mm,
time. There seemed to be this access to vulnerability we haven't seen yet with Joel. So now
right.
that's really being undone. I will say, so I was just trying to remember the timeline of events. I know that this scene is toward the beginning of The Last of Us 2, when Tommy sits down and says, "Tell me everything from the beginning," or he simply
Yeah.
says "from the beginning."
Hmm.
Um, this timeline in the game would have happened after the conclusion of the first game, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So this has a little bit of a different context here.
Hmm.
I don't know. Something about that I didn't enjoy as much. I thought there was so much weight to, there would have been so much more weight to the conversation after this,
Hmm.
after the first game. So I don't want to say this felt anticlimactic, but I felt like this was a really suspenseful conversation that was touched upon in The Last of Us 2.
Hmm.
And it didn't really feel as suspenseful here. We didn't hear the conversation in The Last of Us 2. We simply hear him say "from the beginning," and then the camera kind of cuts and pans away.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There was something about it that just felt a little anticlimactic for me. I don't know if that's the proper word. I didn't feel like it was explorative enough. Like I don't know. I feel like there was more emotions that were probably part of that conversation, like guilt.
Mm.
Um, and we didn't really get that as much in the context of the storyline of where it is in the game, but I still enjoyed the Easter egg of that and the direct line. And obviously, it's an interesting plot twist that Ellie overhears
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because that isn't what happens in the game.
exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like, it does take that different direction in terms of, you know, where this happens after the incident that happens at the end of the first game. And obviously, I'm guessing we're going to get in the season finale as well, potentially, anyway, unless they mix things up. It does hold a different type of weight, you know, compared to this scene that we get here. But I just think I love the way that they twisted this to make it more about that emotional breakdown of Joel and how he feels about everything at this point. And I think Pedro Pascal sells this and it's beautifully done, but it's also him kind of convincing Tommy to take her. And this is the way he can get through to him by showing him the effect that this is having on him. I can't do this. Will you please take her? Can you do this? You know, and he's like, you're the only one I can trust. He says, don't tell Maria, you are the only one I can trust. It's placing that trust in him. It's giving him that, it's putting Tommy in that position of, I need to pass on the torch to you now. You need to do this. And it shows how much Tommy means to Joel as well by telling him this huge thing that he hasn't told anybody else. Incredibly important. And obviously, Tommy agrees, says, look, I'll take her at dawn. And then Joey, this next scene, I mean, take us through it because this is video game galore, this next scene, right?
It was really shot for shot, but we see Ellie reading a journal in her bedroom, and Joel walks in, and it's funny. She says, "Is this all I had to worry about? Boys and movies?" And she says the line that we remember from the game, "I'm not her, you know."
Mm-hmm.
And Joel just shuts down. It's ironic because he can't really share this rule in the beginning. And so he says, don't ask me about Tess
Mm-hmm.
in episode 3 at the conclusion when they decide to go on this journey together officially. And he says
Right.
there are a few rules, and the rule is don't ask me about Tess. But I really feel like he means like don't ask me about Sarah. He just can't
Yeah.
say it because he hasn't shared that yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so Tess, he loves and cares for Tess. And so that loss is significant to him and maybe was Ellie's fault.
Mm.
But the Sarah situation is land that shall not be tread.
Yeah.
And and they have this argument where it's really scene for scene in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And Ellie shares that every person has left her. Joel says, you don't know what loss is. And she says, you don't know what I've been through the same way that I don't know what you've been through. Then Joel says that he's not going to take her. Tommy's
Mm-hmm.
going to take her, and he leaves. And Joel is acting egotistical, but I think this is a culmination of all of the emotions that have surfaced since he's seen Tommy.
Mm.
And that anxiety that was bubbling, that the panic attacks that he's been experiencing, the trauma that has been driving him. He, by seeing Tommy and letting that guard down, I think that he has just entered a space of emotional disarray. And I think equal parts, he's pissed off, but also genuinely believes I can't take care of Ellie. And so he has to sit with that for the night and really debate, can I take her on
Mm.
this journey? If I take her on this journey, is something going to go wrong?
I love that moment of him sitting with that decision that he makes, you know, especially the last thing he says to us, like, you know, you're not my daughter and I'm not your dad. We're going to go
Mm-hmm.
out in the morning, we're going to go our separate ways, and then leaves. And it's just, I mean, the acting between them both in this scene, it's literally, as you said, it's lifted from the game. It's beautifully done. And this is almost like, you know, the scene that we get afterwards, this montage of like Joel thinking back to Christmas time, hanging up the decorations with Sarah on the tree, you know, like seeing that tree obviously in Jackson was triggering for him to bring him back to this moment of thinking about that with Sarah. But it is almost kind of him, you know, reaffirming to himself, you are cargo. You are with me because I'm on a mission to take you somewhere. But that's too late. You know, like he's already got this bond to her, this fatherly kind of bond with her now, where although he's trying to convince himself, you are not my daughter, and he says that, she is kind of his daughter now. And that's too late for that. The bond is there. And especially when, you know, when it kind of goes into the next scene as well, like in the morning, Ellie sits alone in the room. And I like as well, she probably was hoping for Joel to come through the door. You know, like it's when she hears the knock, she says, "Come in." She was waiting for Joel. And then when Tommy comes in, that kind of look on her face, it is that realization of shit, he's not interested anymore. Like this is gone. Like that conversation stands true. And then they go to the shed and obviously Joel's there. Then it's that shock, you know, and this is kind of Joel's almost apology in a way. Like he's sat his thought with it. He's packing up the horse and he even says like, you know, I should have gone. I should have packed up. I should have left 30 minutes ago, but I'm still here. You know, and even when Ellie says, like, did you come to say goodbye or something? And then he says, I stayed here. And he gives Ellie the choice. He says, look, I'm going to give you a choice. I owe you that. And I love, like, within a heartbeat, he can't even finish his sentence. She's like, I choose you. Like, gives him the backpack straight away. And it's wonderful. Of course she was going to choose Joel. She doesn't know Tommy. How can she put her trust in somebody she doesn't know? This is Maria coming out in her. This is the words that Maria give to her. I don't know this man. He means something to Joel, but Joel means something to me. He is the person I trust. Of course it was going to be Joel. You know, and it was beautifully done. And again, like that wonderful moment. Again, I love that we get this book ending of like the relationship of when Joel first sees Tommy. They give him a big, big hug. Oh my God, you're here. This hug goodbye is a very different hug. You know, like they see each other differently now. They understand each other very, very differently. And it is that kind of that big embrace, that goodbye, that good luck, that, you know, and he then gives him his gun as well. Take my gun. And they leave for Jackson. But it was just beautifully played, right?
It was great. And I like the idea that Joel sat with that the whole night and his takeaway was, you deserve a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what that was rooted in. Does he believe that Sarah didn't have agency, didn't have choice? And so he's thinking, if there was a second chance, what would I have done different? Would, you know, Sarah doesn't have the opportunity to make choices and make decisions in this life. So what could I improve on? And it's the idea of you choose your own path. And I think that often is what a successful parent teaches their children, that I'm going to raise you to make good decisions, but at the end of the day, the decision is yours once you enter adulthood. And Ellie is entering adulthood. She's transitioning out of childhood into adulthood, both in physical body, but also emotional body and spiritual body, and the philosophies that drive her and what she believes in and the actions that she decides to take as a result. And I liked that was it. That it wasn't that he said, I'm deciding to go with you. It was, you deserve a choice. I don't know. I just thought it was really, it felt more meaningful. It felt more tender for someone who didn't necessarily apologize.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously they leave on their journey. And then this is really nice, kind of like the relationship that we see here between Joel and Ellie is the best of what we know from them. You know, like even their relationships developed so much, how much they're getting on, how much like, you know, they're just having fun with each other's company again. Now that they've kind of reestablished where they are and that Ellie chose Joel, they understand each other better. Like they just get on. It just works. You know, the training when he's training Ellie with the rifle, like showing her how to aim, and like she's joking about saying that aiming's not right, and then he hits the target immediately. And she's just like, you know, the laugh between them is really good. It's like, it's just that relationship that it's been earned. We've seen it develop and it's just continuing to develop. And obviously this plays off beautifully into what happens at the end of this episode as well and how much weight that holds. But again, I love that as they're traveling, Joel's kind of explaining so much and teaching her again about like the history from before, talking about, you know, like how the world used to work. People used to own things. People used to share things. Some people like that. Some people didn't. You know, all of this, like saying how he used to be a contractor. He used to work with Tommy. They used to build things and like explaining what that is, explaining what football is. Like all of this, I mean, a lot of it's lifted from the game as well. That conversation about football, explaining the rules and everything like that. Ellie does that in the game as well. And it's like this montage that plays beautifully of like, you know, 5 days, I think it is, that they travel to the university. And then they arrive. And I'm sorry, but this university from outside literally looks like the school from X-Men. Like I was waiting for like Xavier to roll out in a wheelchair and let them in. Like literally, can you imagine? But like beautiful. But I love this, you know, like straight away they get there, it looks empty. They're like, you know, and I love that Joel actually explained what a university is again to Ellie. You know, he says like, oh, this is where people like went to find out who they wanted to be and everything like that. And then this conversation, he's like, can we revisit that conversation? When you asked me like what I wanted to do afterwards, when I was younger, I wanted to be a singer. And this is a beautiful reference to the video game again. Joel has a guitar. We see it in the background of one of the episodes prior as well. The fact that he teaches Ellie how to play a guitar, the fact that we see Ellie play a guitar in the second game as well. I mean, from a singer's perspective, Joey, what's your thoughts on this?
I loved that they spoke about this because music is so instrumental. But in the second game, particularly with Ellie learning how to play guitar and developing a relationship with music and creating music on her own,
right?
How music is connective tissue. It brings us back into moments. It allows us to share pieces of ourselves with other people. And obviously, it's really important to the creators of the show, going back to the radio codes and the meticulous choices of what songs are placed in what parts of the episode, how the most powerful episode of the season so far, in my opinion, episode 3 with Bill and Frank, how music was how that started. And we spoke about on that episode how it almost mirrored the Ellie and Dina moment in the second game in the music shop and Aha's Take On Me. There is just this really sweet relationship of music. And I think that it's going to be a fun moment for people who don't fully know the game to experience this later on in the show and then return to season 1, and that like little seed that was planted, they're going to be like, oh, that's so cute that they spoke about it. But I also I like the focal point of it, them talking about that idyllic future. What do you want to do with your life? And, do we have that agency in the apocalypse? Like, are we allowed to make these choices of what we want to create in this world? And how Jackson is a representation of that, and how Joel might think that's a little silly. And at first he kind of brushed it off, but now he's more literally or actually answering the question.
Right.
What he deep down would actually want to answer it. Obviously there's the sheep mascot, which I thought was a cute tie back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And how Joel's kind of moved away from this idea of the sheep and being isolated and being alone, and music is more something that connects us. And he's going from, I want to be alone on a farm and away from people, to I want to actually create something that connects with people. And I think that Ellie is taking him into that transformation and into that shift.
Yeah, beautifully said. We obviously then see the monkeys, which is right from the video game. And Ellie even says, this is the first time first time I've seen a monkey, like literally lifted from the video game. But I like the sense of danger that happens here when, Ellie says guard stations, no guards, gun, question mark. And Joel's like, gun. Something doesn't sit right here. Something doesn't look right. And that's obviously because they spot the Firefly emblem on the sign. As they go further into, kind of closer into the bigger part of the university, there's nobody there. No guard stations, nothing. What is going on? They obviously tie up the horse and they head inside this main building. It's completely empty. There is a packing list that they find, which is what you have when you're moving. A list of everything that you need. They find that left. That's from the video game as well. Suggested that they moved on, obviously onto Utah, and then they hear the noise upstairs. And then, they go up. And again, this is kind of lifted from the video game, really. It is that sense of tension. They go upstairs, they go into the room where the noise is coming from, and we see some monkeys just chilling, just hanging out in there together. And then as soon as they open the door, they dart out of the window. But then the tension and the mood of this episode completely changes when they spot the people outside. And even us as the viewer, we're like, shit, things are getting real now. We see a group of what could be raiders. They're clearly armed with bats and metal rods and things like that. And when they go back out, straight away it's right, let's get back to our horse. Let's leave immediately. Obviously, this is very different from the video game, what happens here. But the sense that Joel gets injured is the main point. And the injury's in the same place, obviously. But I loved how scrappy this fight was. They get back to the horse. Ellie shouts, Joel, look out. This guy obviously tries to attack Joel with a bat. Ellie's pointing the gun as well to try and shoot at him. And then it's just that moment of when Ellie looks down and sees Joel. And then Joel looks down. We see that bat in his, the top of the bat impaled in his side. Jesus Christ. Obviously, in the video game, it's different where he falls from a higher height and falls down and gets basically impaled onto a metal spike, which Ellie has to lift him off from, which is grim in the video game. But yeah, this was just for me that urgency, that sense of everything we're building up to. Again, We've said this a million times. Don't ever get too complacent because the rug will be pulled out from you. This relationship, everything that they built up to so far, we're going to go to the Fireflies. They're going to be here. Everything's going so well. Yes. Oh, wait, they're not here, but that doesn't matter. Now, suddenly, that's all being pulled away from them because Joel has got this critical injury.
I think it's interesting also after watching the following episode to consider, or the following two episodes, so episode 8 really, to consider that they were maybe being scouted to be food.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because watching it, I didn't think that. I will say I was a little. This was another one of those moments that when episode 3, I spoke about a bunch of moments that just didn't make sense to me. This didn't make sense to me. Why would Joel pull out the weapon that stabbed him?
Right.
He has to know, he's a survivalist. He has to
Yeah.
know that that would cause him to bleed out much faster.
Yeah.
So why would he do that? That didn't make any sense. I mean, there's always the idea of like this is reactionary, maybe. I don't know. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't feel congruent with his character. And it's those little bits that irritate me in this in like a show or something. Because I'm like, this doesn't. Joel wouldn't make that decision. He would tell someone, don't pull that out because you're going to bleed out. Because he
Right.
knows how to survive and he knows what happens in a fight and what need, he's killed people. Like he knows what happens. It bothered me a little bit. Another thing that bothered me about this was that I felt like the horse was in a pretty open area.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have at least tried to put the horse behind a tree just to hide the horse and maybe camouflage their presence. They subsequently made it so easy for them to be seen by people, and that's another thing that didn't really feel congruent with Joel's caricature. So yeah, those two things felt a little like the show was trying to set up, oh, this is how they're going to be seen, and oh, this is how Joel's going to bleed out. I'm just like, but those two things wouldn't, I don't think, happen in the reality of this world because Joel wouldn't make those choices. He would be more meticulous and more discreet. That's just how I felt watching it.
And again, like, I mean, he carries tape with him to tape up his boots. Does he not have any tape to wrap around that, to wrap around himself there just to stop the bleeding a little bit more? I mean, I know this.
He wouldn't have taken supplies from Jackson.
Yeah, like you would think, but yeah, that's a really good point, actually, Joey. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense when you think about it like that. But then instead chooses to ride off, obviously. So Ellie and Joel ride off. She's kind of shooting at the raiders behind to like ward them off. And then obviously as they go on, they get out of there. Joel obviously is in critical condition, falls off the horse and passes out. Beautiful acting here by Bella Ramsey, being over the top and just saying like, Joel, you have to get up. I can't do this without you, through tears, which was beautifully done. And then, I love the last shot of the camera panning out and you just hear her saying, Joel, please, Joel, like pleading him to get up. And then we have this beautiful reference point back to the first episode where we hear Depeche Mode again, Never Let Me Down. We recognize 80s means danger. She's in a dangerous position right now. But also, I want to take a look at the lyrics that we hear as well, which are, I'm taking a ride with my best friend. I hope he never lets me down again. He knows where he's taking me where I want to be. Now, if that isn't slapping you in the face, I mean, hello. It's right there on paper. And it was a beautiful way to end the episode again in referencing something that we've already learned from a previous episode. And then we get to the end and that's it. We kind of, pull out and then Ellie's left there looking over Joel. It looks like shit has gotten real. What a nasty situation we're left in. But yeah, Joey, what's your overall thoughts to wrap up on the episode? And then obviously your rating out of 10.
It felt again like one of those episodes that really sets up a lot. I don't feel like it tied anything up with a bow. We got to meet some new characters. We got to see the space that we're going to explore more in the future, which is Jackson. And we got to see Easter eggs like Dina and Shimmer. And I think there's a lot of really cute, fun stuff here. But I think the meat and potatoes of this episode are in the details, because that's how we show love. And if you really watch with a concentrated, fine perspective, you can see all the metaphors being explored and all of these intricacies unfolding that were planted in the earlier episodes and mostly even in episode 1. And because of that, I thought it was such a smart way to do what they did here, to decompress from a pretty high stakes episode that was before, something that was depressive and heavy, moving it into lightheartedness, but really taking us on that narrative journey. I really felt pulled into this, and I didn't feel like there was necessarily a payoff. I don't think it was that kind of episode, but I still loved it, and there hasn't been a moment yet in this show that I'm disappointed. There's little moments.
Yeah, which is fair.
But it happens. It's Hollywood. But yeah, I did rate this an 8 out of 10. I thought it was great. I don't think any episode so far deserves lower than an 8, but it just wasn't like bam enough to be higher for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's absolutely fair. Like, I'm in a similar position. I had like 7.5/8 out of 10. You know, for me, it's one of these episodes where we are kind of literally, as the viewer as well. Like, I know it's 3 months later, but we're seeing like we're moving on. You know, we're going to different parts of this world now where we've been so stuck in, you know, city life where there's like immediate danger. There's so much infected all around us. And this is an episode literally where we don't see any infected. You know, like, again, it's the threat of humans, which we kind of explored as well, like in Kansas City in the last couple of episodes. But we just see the journey that the characters are going on. They're moving forward. The plot is moving forward. Time's moving forward. And we're leaving that stuff kind of behind in a way, but we're not leaving behind the kind of the lessons that we've learned along the way. And we see how the characters have developed because of that. And I love that we see how the relationships change between the characters, how some of them better, how some of them are just completely different from where we started, and how we get a different sense of Ellie and Joel in this episode, which is really, really well done. Like, how they see each other, how we see them as well as characters, you know, like how we see like how the future could be. You know, like that introduction to Jackson's so beautifully done. That reference point of, wow, like things could be like this. Things could get better. And this could be what Joel and Ellie are fighting for, especially Ellie. You know, we kind of see the view of that, what we could see the world looking like when it starts to rebuild. I think is beautifully done. You know, as you said, like, I agree, like the stakes aren't as high here. It is more of a kind of like emotional character beat episode until the very end, when, of course, we do get some pretty high stakes, I guess, and like the injury that Joel sustains. But there have been like stakes in previous episodes which have meant something a lot more. But again, you know, it's a nice little hanger, like leaves us wanting more, kind of find out. You and I know what's going to happen, Joey, obviously, as gamers, but I liked where it was placed. I like that we kind of ended the episode with that. It was the big shock moment. And then obviously the next episode is a flashback. So kind of left on tender hooks as well, where we get little bits of what's happening there. But it's not until the episode after that where these two episodes tie together really, really nicely. So yeah, another fantastic episode in our coverage there of episode 6, Kin of The Last of Us. And please, Joey, do let everybody know as usual where they can find you, all of your socials and everything online.
You can find me on my personals at Joey Dean Official, and you can stream my band King Vagabond's music on Spotify and on all other streaming platforms, and follow us at the King Vagabond.
And there you go. So make sure you go and check them out. And as well with the podcast, as I've said before, this podcast is available on YouTube. So if you do want to watch this and watch all of our videos, coverage of The Last of Us, you can do that. It's on my YouTube page. But if you do just want to listen, we are available on all podcast platforms. You know, just type in Last Week On, you'll find the podcast there. We're also available on all socials as well. So make sure you give us a follow on there, on Twitter, on Instagram. Type in Last Week On Pod, you'll find us on there. If you do want to follow me personally, I am at Straughan87 on Twitter and on Instagram. So come and say hello to me on there if you like. So thank you again, Joey. Another great episode of going through The Last of Us. Still really pumped for this. Can't wait to cover more episodes with you. And then, yeah, where we are right now, we've got the season finale literally like tomorrow. And I'm so excited to get it there.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm excited to see what they do in a 45-minute runtime.
I know.
I'm a little confused, but hey, we will see.
We'll see what happens. All right, everybody. Well, until next time, take care.
Bye.